Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omer Khalid Butt. Today is the 20th of March 2024, and these are the stories that we'll try to decipher during the course of the show. We'll begin with day 166 of the conflict in Palestine, perpetrated by Israel, with the famine and, of course, the deaths that are increasing with every passing hour, every passing minute, and every passing day. The world, or some of it, is trying to come to some resolution as far as the ceasefire is concerned, but Israel is hell-bent to continue with its offensive. It is also hell-bent to continue with a ground offensive in Rafah. Will the US be able to stop it, or are there other intentions at hand? This and more will be discussed in our first story. Our second story concerns the US elections. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen, have moved closer to a November rematch, but a lot of voters in the US are unhappy with the situation. Why is that? Also, will all the convictions of Trump be a kind of trap for him to not contest the elections, or will he contest them nevertheless? This and more will be discussed in our second segment. Then we are going to discuss the mysteries of COVID. 4 years have passed, ladies and gentlemen, since COVID began across the world and in Pakistan as well. It was declared a global pandemic in March 2020. A lot of questions regarding it. Why did it spread so quickly? How sick would it make people? Would a single bout bioprotection from future cases? This and more have finally now been answered in a report, and we'll decipher that as well. Then we'll talk about the International Day of Happiness that is being observed across the world, but unfortunately, with all the crises engulfing the world, happiness seems a distant memory. Nevertheless, we need to be as positive as possible. And finally, the Capital Development Authority has selected Margot as Islamabad's official mascot to give the federal capital an identity. So finally, Islamabad has an identity in the form of Margot. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns day 166 of the Palestine and Israel conflict. We've been joined by Ambassador Naela Chohan, former ambassador. She's right here with us in the studios. Thank you very much, ma'am, to have joined us. More than 5 months, ma'am, into Israel's ground and air campaign, US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says that 100% of Gaza's population is now at severe levels of acute food insecurity. World Health Organization says an increasing number of children are on the brink of death due to acute hunger, newborns simply dying because of low birth weight. Then there are those who cannot get access to medicine, due to which they are also in a debilitating state. Famine is imminent, is likely to occur by May in northern Gaza and could spread across the enclave by July. This is a report that is backed by the United Nations that has just been released. Malnutrition, food insecurity continue. Will this be incentive enough, in your point of view, for a ceasefire? Will there be any humanity in those who are perpetrating this in Gaza to stop or to pause it for some time?
To be very honest, unfortunately, this is the month of Ramadan, and one needs to be optimistic, but the question you have posed, those who are perpetrating all this violence are unlikely to stop. You have heard Mr. Netanyahu. You recall the recent dialogue between President Biden and Netanyahu, and President Biden said that Israel has gone over the top, and that they even said that they may consider stopping the military aid. And yet Netanyahu says, I have drawn my own red line, and that red line will not be crossed until the whole of Hamas population is destroyed. How does he define Hamas? Because if you look at 2019, in a Likud party meeting, Netanyahu himself had stated that they had created Hamas to weaken PLO, so that there is no stability in the land of Palestine, which would give them space to expand. So at one point, they are making this so-called high moral ground to revenge for the killing of 1,400 Israelis on 7th of October. But Hamas was created with a design, but now that design somehow is unachievable, because Hamas has its own mind, its own agenda. And no matter how many Hamas leaders you kill, the kind of atrocities that are being committed will create more reaction, and this will be an unending story. So, I'm sorry to say, although with all the condemnation from international community, Netanyahu is not willing to stop.
Because Netanyahu is being backed by, despite the statements that come, the strong statements, these statements need to be, some solid action needs to be added to these statements, so that Israel is pressurized. But Israel is not being pressurized to that extent that it can stop its incursion, and the ground offensive in Rafah is all but a reality, the way that Netanyahu has been spurning out statements, also spurning a plea from Joe Biden to call off this ground assault of Rafah. Speaking of that, air attacks on 2 houses in Rafah, southern Gaza, have killed 14 people. 200 Palestinians have been arrested, 20 more killed during an assault on Al-Shifa. Again, the hospital is being targeted, which they say is because there are, Palestinian fighters that are present here. Again, something that is not proven to date, and there's no concrete proof that Israel has given. Israel's genocide and ethnic cleansing continues. Do you feel we are looking at one of the worst man-made disasters of this century?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I also agree with your earlier point that there is a gap between the rhetoric and the action. So, as you're aware, Canada has decided to not provide military aid to Israel, and it's being said that would USA also do so. Even if they do so, Mr. Butt, you must keep in mind that the deal they already have with Israel is valid till 2028, approved by the Congress. So, even President Biden, if he states that they are going to stop the assistance actually on the ground will not stop before 2028, which is about 5 years from now. So, it would be 5 years of continued military support for this violence.
But can't the Congress take out a resolution, a joint resolution, and just stop this aid?
Would they want to?
That is the main question, isn't it? Ceasefire talks between an Israeli delegation and mediators from Qatar, the US and Egypt has entered its 3rd day in Qatar's capital, Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson says while it remains too early to talk about a breakthrough, Doha remains cautiously optimistic. Should we remain cautiously optimistic?
Why not? We should remain cautious, but cautiously optimistic means that there is no silver lining, and yet you have to have faith that somehow this genocide, it's worse than genocide, Mr. Butt. If you look at the definition of genocide, they've exceeded it. And that's what the ICJ had also cautioned Israel, that whatever they are doing as their pretext of right to self-defense, it should not exceed the definition of genocide as per the Convention on Genocide. So, they should have kept the threshold under, but they have not. They have exceeded it. So, that also will have repercussions on them.
All right, another repercussion from the US also I'd like to discuss. A group of more than 100 Democratic donors and activists have sent a letter to US President Joe Biden warning him that growing anger over his support for Israel will increase the chances for a Trump victory at the CS presidential elections. Are there going to be political repercussions of Joe Biden and the US's blatant support for Israel?
I think so, and I think they are also, the politicians are already using the Israel card in their election campaigning. So, yes, I think it will have repercussions on Joe Biden, because now he is being given titles which implicate him in all the killings that are taking place in Palestine.
All right. Also, Israeli settlers and their role in the West Bank, as we see, is something that hasn't been stopped to date, although there have been resolution passed against them in different countries. But between October 2023 and January 24, settlers in the West Bank built at least 15 outposts, 18 roads, which are illegal under both Israeli and international law. They have built hundreds of meters of fences and built multiple roadblocks, which has limited the movement of the Palestinians. Then the attacks on Palestinian residents is also going on unabated. Are these settlers being given a free rein? They are also, blocking the aid from properly entering Palestine.
Yes, but in our earlier program also, if you recall, we had talked about it, that this is their modus operandi. First is the ground offensive. The IDF goes and cleans out the major hurdles, and they are followed by armed so-called settlers who start grabbing all the areas that are being vacated from the local population. And because they are armed, the local population is unarmed, they cannot reclaim their properties or their places, while these armed settlers then occupy those areas and call it their home. And this has had the basic formula of Israel's expansion.
All right. Speaking of Israel and Palestine, there's also the whole question mark around UNRWA's role now that some countries have blocked the assistance that they were giving, including the United States, which was the biggest donor as far as UNRWA is concerned. There's an agreement between the US congressional leaders and the White House on a bill funding military, State Department, other government programs that will continue to block UNRWA funding until March of 2025. How will UNRWA be able to sustain itself? Will other countries pour in the necessary lacunae in these assistance that the US will not be providing till 2025?
Well, that's a very good question. Firstly, the point that needs consideration is that why are they penalizing UNRWA? The reason is that while UNRWA is working on the ground, helping the victims, that also is providing data at the international level on the magnitude of atrocities being committed. So this is by proxy exposing Israel's violations of international law on the ground. They have to stop that. They can't do it in other way. So they say, oh, they are partisan and they are doing this and they are doing that, and consequently they will not be given funds for their action. In other words, they are choking down the Palestinians. Even the aid, if you recall, recently they did from air, dropping of aid via Israel. The kind of packages that were thrown killed 5 Palestinians. So, can you imagine that they are not giving?
Well, that is another question mark, Ambassador Naela. The fact is that when you can easily bring the aid through the routes that are being blocked by Israel, wherein Israel says it is not blocking anything, it is letting as much of it enter, which is far from the truth. But the fact remains that air raids are not as effective as all the aid that is coming through the land routes.
Indeed, but on top of it, this aid is killing people.
True.
So it's hitting people, So how if UNRWA is stopped, then of course USA is a major donor. Its functions will be affected.
$300 to $400 million.
Exactly. So you will be choking down the Palestinians.
But maybe this is the intention. I don't know what the intention is, because since the 7th of October, I'm only seeing the plight of the Palestinians and not much being done from the international community, including the backers of Israel. Axios Ambassador Naela Chohan, which is a US media outlet, reports that the Biden administration is weighing several alternatives to the ground invasion of Israel in Rafah, and will propose these options in a high-level Israeli delegation next week. Now, there are 2 alternatives that are on the cards as per Axios. Delay a military operation in Rafah, focus on stabilizing the humanitarian situation in northern Gaza, and this plan will involve involve constructing shelters for civilians evacuating from Rafah. Second will be focused in the first stage on securing Egypt's side of the border with Gaza as part of a joint US-Egypt-Israel plan to destroy tunnels under the border and create infrastructure to prevent arms smuggling into Gaza. What's your comment on these options? Are these viable? If they are true, that is.
Exactly, if it is true. Already, I think their team has reached United States, the Israeli delegation. I think today or tomorrow they are landing. This Israeli, Egypt, USA understanding of those tunnels allegedly through which arms are being given, who are they being given to? Because the Palestinians are unarmed. So it is a very complex situation because there are quite a few vigilantes and gangs.
You talk of vigilantes. Itamar Ben-Gvir has announced approving 100,000 new gun licenses since the 7th of October to Israelis, and he proudly mentions this. You know, on the one hand, they are investigating all kinds of arms through tunnels, and on the other hand, Israel is openly giving these arms to the Israelis to further weaponize them.
Exactly. So you can see the audacity and indifference that is being demonstrated, and like we earlier talked about, the gap between the rhetoric and the actual actions is so big that there's no way you can, reduce that gap until there is sincerity by these powers that claim to have stake there.
I think the sincerity is the key word, because if they couldn't have a ceasefire before the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, I don't know what they have in mind for the coming days. And if, God forbid, this ground offensive in Rafah actually takes place with the million plus crammed inside this small space, I don't know what the repercussions are going to be as far as the casualties are concerned. And I don't know whether, I think Israelis or the Israeli government will be able to sleep very well at night, but all us bystanders who are watching this ethnic cleansing as it unfolds, we can't sleep properly because of this genocide, because of this barbarism that is going on since October last year. And I hope some respite comes. I really hope some light comes out of this tunnel for the moment, which seems quite bleak, which I thought at least that something would happen in the month of Ramadan, but that also didn't happen. Thank you very much, Ambassador Naela Chohan, to have joined us, to have talked to us. It's a very sensitive topic, I'm sure, to you as well. Being a mother, you understand that, and to all of us who have a little bit of humanity still left in them, to see what is unfolding in front of our eyes. Let's hope some positivity comes out of this conflict, this war in the coming days.